Milwaukee Public Television is proud to present Next Avenue Community Conversations. Next Avenue brings baby boomers and beyond smart, useful information and compelling perspectives. Our goal is simple: to provide provocative information that makes your life more meaningful and enjoyable. Next Avenue is made possible by the Helen Daniels Bader Fund, a Bader philanthropy with a focus on Alzheimer's disease and healthier older adults. On this episode, the benefits of growing your own food. As urban farming becomes more popular, we'll see how fresh farm-to-table food is good for the mind, the body, and the spirit. We are coming to you from the beautiful facilities of Concordia University in Mequon, Wisconsin. Now here's your host, Mark Siegrist.
You know, the urban farming movement here in southeast Wisconsin is an exciting one, and of course one of special interest to my generation, those of us who are 50 and older. The issues that arise from the urban farming movement are of special interest to this generation, to the baby boomer generation, as it affects the environment, improving the environment, as it impacts the various neighborhoods, more equitable sharing of fresh produce, as it affects our families' health through our daily consumption of eating fresh. But the question is, how does one get started in this movement? How do we select the soil that we use? How do we select the species that we plant in our gardens? How do we properly nurture and harvest that fresh produce and convert it into daily consumption of not only tasty, but nutritious meals for our family's table? It's an exciting movement, and that's the focus of this edition of Next Avenue's Community Conversation. It's wonderful to be with you. And to further explore this great issue, we've invited three professionals who really are dedicating their lives to this movement right now. We're first of all joined by Dan Graves. Dan serves as a farm and education manager for the Victory Garden Initiative, which is based here in Milwaukee. And we're also joined by his colleague, Gretchen Mead. She is the founder and executive director of the Milwaukee-based Victory Garden Initiative. Professor Bruce Bessert is the director of the Concordia Center for Environmental Stewardship, which is our host location tonight. And isn't this just a beautiful setting here for our discussion tonight? How about a nice round of applause for our special guest? This is such a fun topic and such an appropriate one. First of all, help us further understand, Dan and Gretchen, what the Victory Garden movement is all about and how it's helping to educate and to inspire further participation in the urban farming movement here in southeast Wisconsin. Dan, could you start us off?
Sure. Yeah, so the Victory Garden Initiative helps build communities by installing gardens, and that's a portion of what we do. In addition to that, we have a 1.5-acre garden site on the north side of Milwaukee that naturally builds community by growing a ton of food at the site. And lastly, at the site, we also do a lot of educational programming that draws in schools, school groups to come to the farm and really see where their food is coming from. But I think Gretchen can talk a little bit more succinctly about the origins of the organization and how it all kind of came to be.
Where did the idea come from, Gretchen?
Well, it happened in Shorewood about 7 years ago for me. I grew up in a rural area where I grew a lot of food. My parents grew a lot of their own food. They hunted and foraged from the forest that they managed and owned, and it was part of my upbringing. And when I moved to Milwaukee to get my master's in social work, I was missing something very tangible. I almost explain it as a feeling of claustrophobia, perhaps, or I couldn't quite figure out what was eating at me. And I really needed to grow food, I realized, because I had always done it. I'd worked on farms and that kind of thing, and so I started growing food in my front yard in Shorewood. And some people loved it. Many people loved it. I met my neighbors. People were inspired by it. People started growing food in their own front yards. And other people, of course, didn't like it so much. It became, kind of a controversy. And it was a controversy that came to, I guess, a head when somebody put a raised bed garden, like the one we're going to describe later, in the parkway, which is the area between the sidewalk and the street. And that's, of course, public land. And then there was a public conversation with the village about should people be allowed to grow food in their front yard. And that tiny I don't know, simplistic thing of growing food in the front yard not only ended up as a story on Wisconsin public radio, but national public radio. And because the person who put in the garden that was controversial did it during an event, our first original Great Milwaukee Victory Garden Blitz, which was an event that put in gardens like this all over the city, it became a story about Victory Garden Initiative and helped launch the formation of an organization, which was at the time it was really just sort of an idea. But as I spent time in Milwaukee, I worked as a social worker in Milwaukee. I had a personal story and need to grow food. I understood deeply the food system, how that affects people in poverty, how it affects the economy, the environment. As I learned about these things, I just had to, I had this niggling voice in the back of my mind that was so strong. I just had to spread the idea of helping people grow their own food in the city. It seemed like a small piece of a solution to really big problems.
And during our further discussion, I want to learn more about your movement and how you're helping through education and supplying materials and really mentoring people through the process. It's an exciting story to explore. But Professor, the Environmental Center for Stewardship has its hand in a lot of different issues affecting the environment, the coastal area, recycling, and also being stewards of our own fresh produce.
Absolutely.
This certainly falls in line with your outreach.
Oh, absolutely. Our core mission is to instill or promote sound environmental ethics in anybody who comes through our doors. So that takes a variety of forms, both looking at the world around us and within. And so we take a look at both, and we see that the area of gardening or the area of making one's own food has got a very visceral effect, no pun intended, but it is something that is part of your fiber. If you came from a farm. I was born on a 100-acre dairy farm in northeast Wisconsin, and the gardening bug, like Gretchen, has followed me wherever I've been.
It was your life. It was part of your daily routine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Living in New Orleans and Los Angeles and the Black Hills of South Dakota, you find ways to accomplish that, whether that's container gardening or in the ground or whatever. But it's something that doesn't leave you. And truly, it's got a lot of benefit way beyond the nutritional value.
It affects the environment, and it also is a more equitable sharing of resources, is
Absolutely.
it not? Dan, I know you see it that way. It's part of your mission.
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think the beauty of gardening, and actually just of planting anything really, is that it can be done in such a simple way. I will never get over being able to plant a seed in soil every single year. First of all, when it's the middle of winter in Wisconsin, I'm like, nothing is ever going to grow again. We're never going to have spring. But when that time comes and you sow the first seed and you see that it produces life, it's just a miracle. It's a miraculous thing, and it's really a teaching tool, and it's something that's so fundamental, I think, to being a human, that everyone eats, right? So everyone has a part in this. And I find it particularly rewarding to work with youth, with young people,
oh, yeah.
Especially those that have not, that don't know where their food comes from.
To help them understand the soil,
well,
and the miracle
have them
of it.
do it.
Yeah.
To have them see and do it is it's such a beautiful thing, and it's transformational just to see how a kid can go from not knowing where their food is coming from to naming all these different foods and what has to go into the food to be able to grow it, and then eating it, something that they maybe didn't even know what it was before, to harvesting it and then eating it and enjoying it and then telling other people about it. They're evangelizing like food without even really, good fresh food without even really knowing it. It just kind of becomes a part of who they are. They awaken a part of their soul that maybe they didn't know about before.
And Gretchen, that's the bedrock of your movement, is it not? By bringing the food resource, the planting and the nurturing and the harvesting of that food resource into the neighborhoods and creating self-sustaining, neighborhoods that are consuming their own the fruits of their own labor.
Right. There are many areas in Milwaukee, and it's not just Milwaukee. It's rural areas. It's around the state and around the country that people simply do not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables that are high quality and nutritional. And when we grow our own, they are of the highest quality. They contain the most nutrients, and they're readily available. And as Dan was saying, to children especially, they're transformative. We see kids in a season that go from really not understanding these things at all to, please, Mr. Dan, will you please let me grow those colored carrots, those multicolored carrots that we had last year?
They're developing a taste.
They do.
And a discipline for it.
Yeah, and if you can imagine the difference and the immediate lessons in that from the didactic lecture in a classroom where someone is told to eat the thing off the nutritional plate, the diagram, you know, I mean, what a slow learning process that is. And who knows if anyone's ever going to go do the educational thing that you told them to do in a classroom. But the results that we see in the garden are immediate. It's just, it engages children immediately and adults.
How does it affect, obviously it's nutritious, but how does consuming fresh food, fresh produce on a daily basis, or as close to that in this seasonal climate that we live in, our behavior, our outlook on life, how does it affect our personalities and just our outlook on life when we're eating correctly and fresh?
Well, I can speak for myself, and I assume this is maybe the same for everyone. I just feel better as a whole. When I went through a period of time in my life as I was entering late adolescence, I would say in early college, and I was moved away from my mother's amazing food. I didn't have access to my mom's good food, the garden food, you know, things in my household changed. I noticed a decline in my sort of emotional vibrance personally. And it was really because I started eating what I often call the SAD diet, the standard American diet, which maybe is, it makes us sad. We all know that.
Which we fall into from
We
time
do.
to time.
It's processed wheat, meat, cheese, and corn syrup, really. And that is what the bulk of our diet is made out of. It's a monocrop. It's very low in nutrients, very high in calories, and that makes people sad. And when I worked with clients in the inner city, I just saw this everywhere. Or in the hospital setting. I worked in the hospital setting as a social worker, and you know, people with already crises happening, or mental health issues, or previous existing health issues, not being fed the right food, and of course they don't get well. They don't get well. It affects every element of our wellness when we don't eat the right foods.
Professor, how does this lifestyle and this discipline of growing our own fresh produce in the neighborhoods, or certainly closer to our homes,
Right.
how does it affect the environment? How does it contribute to the environment?
Well, there's a lot of different factors. The one I think of most often is the immediacy, the closeness of you to the land, for one thing. The other thing is that it's far more efficient to grow it yourself. You have all these layers in a standard economy where you're looking at the producer, the wholesaler, and maybe 2 or 3 other steps in line. Huge transportation distances in some cases, especially in this climate, where we have much of our food coming from either Western United States or South America or other places, where economically it doesn't make sense. And another thing too, when you're harvesting your own food, you're taking it at its peak of nutrition. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you take a look at where some of this other food comes from, it's being picked far before it's ripe and ready to go. And so you lose on all that nutrition. Mm. So there's a number of different things that come into play in that way. Just from our, yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sometimes I imagine, thinking of the drought in California, which everyone is talking about right now. And I thought this occurred to me the other day at the garden, because we pick up compostables from a local grocery store. Mm-hmm. And at the bottom of it, if we don't do it just right, it's a pond of water. It's like sloppy, messy, or these big compost piles that if we don't do it right, that's what happens. And it occurred to me the other day that water is California's water. Sure. I mean, we are literally, if we care about the drought in California, we have to consider our own consumptive habits here. We're bringing literally water from California to the Midwest when we obviously are water rich. So it doesn't make sense from an ecological lens to continue to import fruits and vegetables that we really don't need.
And environmental concerns truly are global. As you said, what we do here, our discipline here, is reflected in other parts of the world.
It absolutely is.
So it really does matter.
Yeah.
It really is a neighborhood by neighborhood initiative.
It is. We are sitting on 20% of the world's fresh water. That's the statistics that I've heard.
That's an amazing scene behind us, absolutely.
Yeah. And
20%.
20% of the world's fresh water are the Great Lakes. That's an important thing to understand.
Dan, you're going to...
Well, yeah, I mean, when you guys were talking, what I was thinking of is just how difficult of a shift it is, because it's a social shift that needs to happen for us to be able to do this more effectively, to be able to eat more effectively and think more sustainably. Because it actually doesn't make any sense for us in the middle of January to be able to go to the grocery store and get a tomato. Because that tomato has to be coming from somewhere either close by that has a lot of heat to be able to produce a tomato, or somewhere very far away where the tomato is, in season. So as we were discussing earlier, it's a shift in how we think and how we approach the way that we eat. Not that it's easy, but I think growing our own food is a very wonderful first step towards...
We used to celebrate the seasons by eating certain foods.
Yeah,
but, I mean, we've really become...
Yeah, just year-round.
Yeah. One of the exciting things that you folks do in the Victory Garden Initiative is you provide the raised garden beds for private homes and for businesses to start building their own gardens. And you brought an example here, and if you don't mind, we can step down here, take a look at it, and you can explain to us, how this all works. So I'm going to let you, maybe I should get on this side of you.
Yeah.
Okay. You brought some different soils and some different things.
So
start us off.
Yeah, it's a fairly simple process. We get lumber. This is Douglas fir. We contract with a local hardware store and just get a giant load of it.
And what is the thickness of this? What are we looking at here in terms of the framing and of the wood?
Yeah, these are 2x8s that are cut into 4-foot and 8-foot pieces.
And the depth then of the soil that goes in here would be how high?
About 8 inches.
Okay.
Yeah, about 8 inches.
Okay.
And what we recommend is, because there's lots of issues with heavy metal contamination in the city, we recommend the use of raised bed gardens because it's safer. Because we don't really know, and you can do soil tests, but it's a little bit safer.
No, it's safer, and explain that to me.
Meaning, well, there can be contaminants in the soil.
Okay.
And they're particularly concentrated in urban areas where there's been industry, high levels of industry.
Right in the neighborhood.
Yeah, yep. So all soils have, differing levels of heavy metals, but it's particularly concentrated in urban areas.
So the way this works is someone who's interested will contact your organization.
Yep.
And for a fairly nominal fee, you will deliver the framing, right?
Yeah, for $160, we will deliver the whole 9 yards.
And this is what you get.
We come and we blitz. So what we do is we bring all the lumber. We'll have a crew of volunteers with us, and we put together the whole garden bed. And not only that, but we also bring the soil. I brought the cardboard along because it's cardboard and it's also bags.
So now you lay the cardboard down first, and what does that do?
We do that as a weed barrier. Now, it's not a permanent weed barrier, but it will, it'll break down over time, and it'll at least suppress the grass. We typically put it right around the perimeter to stop any grass from creeping in.
Okay.
And then we fill the whole thing with soil.
And where do you get your soil? I mean, you got a special cocktail mixture of soil.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we contract with a composting farm called The Farm in southeastern Wisconsin. So they collect compostable things from all over southeastern Wisconsin, and they turn it into beautiful soil. And so they bring loads and loads of soil for us, and that's what we...
And then you add some of your own components to that soil, too.
No, we get it from them.
Right?
Yeah, we get it from them.
So the mixture would be natural soil,
it's all compost,
organic.
Yeah, high in cations, perfect for growing food.
This stuff is going to work.
It's
this
wonderful.
Stuff is going to pop.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But I also wanted to bring this along because, making a garden it's not rocket science, right? People can go to the store and buy, the boards.
You do this every day. You're an expert. For some of us, those of us who are just getting started, it can be a little intimidating.
Yep.
That's why
start small. It doesn't have even the great thing about a 4 by 8 foot bed is it's accessible on all sides. It's not too big. It's a manageable size. You can do stacks of them, so you can even have one that's higher.
Yes.
That would kind of integrate with what you guys are experimenting with here. I brought wood chips because we use lots and lots of wood chips at our farm, and the wood chips will eventually turn into soil too, and they're also free from most municipal sites, so that's a wonderful thing too.
Now you bring the soil along with the raised bed.
We do.
So you leave the soil. And then do you bring some wood chips too?
No, typically we don't.
Okay.
But we use a lot of them at our farm site.
So you bring it, you throw this up, you spread the soil, and then it's up to the. But you also consult the homeowner or the proprietor at a business as to what kind of species they might consider planting in the garden?
Yeah, we offer a series of educational classes too that train people in how to grow their own food, and we have a food leader certificate program. Where people can actually design their own project to further the local food system in this area. So there's lots of different ways that people can learn how to.
He's a good teacher. I think he deserves an applause as we go back to our assigned seats. That's exciting. I mean, you do make it sound easy, but I mean, there is a bit of a learning curve, and this is just one element of what you do. You also plant fruit trees throughout Metro Milwaukee. Tell us about that, Gretchen.
We do. Every time we think we get really good at something, then we want to do something more. There's so much work to do, right? So a few years ago, we developed a contest called the Fruity Nutty 5. And basically, we give away community orchards. And we define an orchard by about 30 trees, food-bearing trees of some kind, or bushes like raspberries. And if you are a community member, you can organize your community. And we have to have about 10 participants. That's the rule, at least 10 participants per community. You have to agree to take our classes, have a piece of land that's accessible, or have many people's land accessible. So if you can imagine a front yard community orchard where everybody shares, then you can apply to win an orchard. And we have a panel of community members, some of them who have won orchards in the past, who determine who should be the winner. And then in February every year we have a fundraiser called the Fruity Nutty Affair, where we actually earn the money in real time to pay for the orchards that we then give away that night. So it's pretty exciting.
So when you're planting an orchard, you're looking at long-range planning. You're looking at some work here that's going to last maybe for a generation or more. When you're talking about your gardens, you're looking at an annual commitment. So it's a combination of you're planning for now and you're also planting for the future.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but it was someone wise, I'm sure. The question is, when should I plant a fruit tree? And the answer is 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you think so much of this, the planning aspect of this movement, that your students are very much involved in designing some portable raised beds so that everyone can benefit from this. Tell us about that, Professor.
Right.
It's exciting.
Exactly. The basic raised bed garden is wonderful, but a lot of people don't have access to that kind of area. And so what we're looking at from a number of different standpoints is different types of elevated gardens, I guess is the best way to say it. Table gardens is one type. But something as simple as container gardening on your deck. That's the specific kind of tomato, called patio tomato, that is a bush type that grows wonderfully in a pot, doesn't spread all over the place, and you can literally grow it anywhere. Some of the other things that we're working on right now are ones that are V-shaped, indented underneath so that they're wheelchair accessible and built to a height that's comfortable for wheelchair. As also, some people cannot bend down, and so we're working closely with occupational therapy and physical therapy departments here at Concordia and their students on looking at what heights, what designs. And to make maximum flexibility, we're making them mobile so that we can move them around. We can try different types of configurations. And so all of those types of configurations, types of models that we're developing right now certainly aren't new. I mean, a lot of people have done a lot of these types of things before, but we're applying them to therapy, to gardening therapy, for the elderly and just for the general homeowner or apartment owner who wants to grow food on their their deck, their balcony, wherever they want to grow it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know all of you feel strongly about, I mean, all three of you are drawn to the soil.
Oh, absolutely.
To a large extent because of your backgrounds. That's how you were raised. You go for a couple of weeks, and we talked about this before, you know, with your organization, you get bogged down with paperwork for a few days and you're not out working the soil. It affects you, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you're a different person when you're involved, when you have hands-on contact with the soil and with the gardens that you're helping people put together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it doesn't have to be that. When you were talking before, Bruce, it made me think it doesn't even have to be this big if you're starting. I mean, if you're intimidated by something even this big, bucket is a wonderful place to start because buckets are free, you know, if found in the right spot. And they
Major League Baseball uses buckets.
Yeah, right. And you know, and then you can start by growing, you know, something as simple as a tomato or, you know, some salad greens that can be harvested right off your porch. But getting your hands in the soil, I think, as I said before, connects us to something that makes us human. You know, and when we disconnect ourselves from that, we distance ourselves from our own humanity.
When we're planting these species, how important is it to keep it natural? The species of plants that are natural to the environment we're in. How important is that?
Well, from a nutritional perspective, having really high-quality organic soil is very important. When we monocrop and use just chemical implements to grow food, I often compare it to a person who's on steroids, if that's the way you could look at it, because they're pumped up and big and they look big and strong and healthy, but actually they're really not. And I think plants are the same way. The chemicals that are used in industrial agriculture are kind of like that. So if we really foster the soil, it is living. It is, there are millions and billions of microorganisms under the soil at all times. It's a whole ecosystem that we barely know is there. But when we grow soil so that we can grow plants, it feeds the plants in a way that it's the plants and then the food that we eat are filled with micronutrients. Those things that we evolved to eat, the things that we've been eating for millions of years as a species up until this point that we have needed and always will need, then that fills that craving in our body when we have
How
good soil.
enlightened is the general medical practice, healthcare in this country, to this movement and to the importance of eating fresh and to the importance of staying away from those kind of chemicals? How enlightened is medicine as we know it?
Well,
Are we still
I think there's a
catching up in
huge
that area?
deficit. I think
are.
we're behind. We're very behind. I think other countries probably understand it much more than we do. I don't know that for sure.
You're nodding your head, Professor.
Yeah, there's a very big disconnect and has been for some time. Our reliance on artificial medications and all those types of things is indicative of that. There is a push for more of the natural remedies, more of the things that our grandparents knew about and used as home remedies. And there's validity to those types of things. Certainly not to take away from all the medical advances we've had, but there's definitely a place for some of these types of very fundamental, and again, I say very visceral, very basic nutritional types of things that correct a lot of the ills that we're going through right now.
I know there's a lot of communication between departments here on campus at Concordia, and you have an emerging physician's assistant program. There's a lot of dialogue between your center and that program, is there not?
Again, it's still in its infancy. We're getting there. We're getting past the dialogue stage, and we're starting to actually do some common projects, those types of things, and hopefully. Our students, when they come out, will have a much more broad view of therapy in whatever field that they are. We're very heavily into medical sciences here. But we see that in pharmacy. We have a whole area that's dealing with natural remedies, natural pharmaceuticals from the rainforest, from common areas around here.
Maybe
Something
you could have a department that is just called "You Are What You Eat."
Yeah,
you can start with that.
What
do you think? Grandma would love it.
Our diet is reflected in our health, correct?
Yeah.
Reflected in our health.
It really is. I think we are what we eat, and I take that very seriously. I want to eat food that was grown in a way that respects the soil, that respects the earth, respects the people, respects an economy that takes care of our community. I believe that when I eat food that is grown in a way that I think is just and sustainable and nutritious and builds community, that it literally feeds my soul. That's important to me.
It's the sustainability aspect of what I look at is, can we maintain things in good order that leave our planet better for subsequent generations? And this certainly falls into that category.
Your initiative takes this whole movement so seriously. You're actually offering certificates of completion of specialized courses for mentors in the program so that they can go on to play different roles in this movement. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're referring to the Food Leader Certification Program, and it's a year-long program. We train people to understand the food systems issues, to know how to grow their own food, and we do leadership development and community organizing training so they can go out into the community and engage their own communities. When I first started doing this, I got emails and phone calls from all over Milwaukee. Can you help me? Can you help me? Can you help me? And so I really took a look at, the answer was no, I couldn't help everyone. And so then I really took a look at who was the person that was needed to help. And I wanted to empower that person that called me to believe they could do it.
Right.
You know, and as we broke it down, those were the main skills. You need to know how to grow your own food. You need to understand why we care, so you can talk about it. And then you need to understand how to lead and organize people to get a project done. And it's as simple as that. So over 1 year, they will plan and implement a project, or at least the beginning of a project, and at the end with a certification. Our hope is that when somebody sees that on LinkedIn or on someone's resume, that it means something as we move forward. And I think increasingly it will.
And a family starting off with their garden can be assigned a mentor from your initiative that'll help them through a season. Am I correct? I mean, from the laying of the raised bed to the actual harvest.
Right. We pair brand new gardeners. We get a lot of them. I think the Blitz and this model of the raised bed garden is a perfect catalyzer. We joke and we call it the gateway drug to gardening. This right here. It's just quick, it's easy, it gets the job done.
Yeah.
And but because of that, we have thousands of brand new gardeners that we're connected to, and we don't want them to sit around scratching their head wondering why it didn't work. We're hoping that it does work, and if we can connect them to someone that has a mid-level of gardening, if anybody's out there that wants to help, knows a little bit, call us.
Because your organization, really, the fuel of it is volunteer
Absolutely.
effort.
We can't live without volunteers.
What kind of vegetables are we planting, and what do you encourage, especially beginners, to plant in these gardens, in order to achieve some success and to actually have a nutritious crop?
Yeah, well, actually, I brought some vegetables in that came from our Concordia garden site that were harvested today.
And I think they're right down there.
Yeah, they're right down there.
Yep. Professor's plant. What are we looking at, sir?
Greens are a wonderful place to start. It's pretty hard to mess those up. Right down there we have some Swiss chard. We have a couple different colors of Swiss chard. We have a couple of different varieties of lettuce. We have some radishes. Radishes are a wonderful place to start too. 25 days to harvest. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Carrots, and then my personal favorite, garlic. I didn't actually bring the garlic, but I did bring garlic scapes, which are kind of like a little curly-Q thing that you can remove from the top. That puts more energy growth into the bulb, but they taste just like garlic. So it's kind of like getting like it's like the pre-season of the garlic season. So.
I share an office space with Dan, and I know he loves garlic.
He loves garlic a lot. And we're growing a lot of peppers here in Metro Milwaukee. Yeah. And what other kinds of standard produce?
Tomatoes are a wonderful one. Squash. People grow zucchini. Sometimes they grow too much zucchini. Corn. Everybody likes corn. Although you don't see that as often in the backyard garden, but we do have a bunch of corn planted at ours. Beans are a fantastic crop. Peas. Once you start, you just really can't stop. But if you're a beginning gardener, what do you like to eat? That's what you should be asking yourself. Right. What is something that you really like to eat and that you'd like to see how it grows, and start there. And the cool thing about gardening is that you're never done learning about it, right?
You're still, I mean, you're a pretty seasoned guy at this, but I mean, you're still learning?
I'm still a rook. I don't know where I'd place myself, but every year you learn just oodles and oodles about growing food. It's like a never-ending
So you
story.
continue to work at your craft.
Yeah, yep.
I would love to get you folks here on location involved with your great questions and by you participating in the dialogue. And just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. And when we wait for you to do that, I'd like to learn a little bit more about, okay, now where do we go to learn how to prepare some great recipes? And how do we apply this harvest to our daily plate for ourselves and for our family? Where do we go? What kind of resources are there in terms of learning how to do some meal planning with the freshness that we harvest in the garden? Gretchen?
Wow, meal planning. I learned how to cook, I think, from my mom mostly, and from experimenting. Honestly, do you want to know what I do is I have all of this food and I figure out what I'm going to do with it, and that's how I always start.
You do some experimenting?
I absolutely do, and I have basic tricks like how do you make a basic vinaigrette dressing that's going to go on a salad, and then how do you start with that basic idea of a vinaigrette, which is a soured thing, and an oil, and then add every kind of herb and change it up every single time you do it so that you have a technique, basically, of making salad dressing that can go on many, many things, from just greens to a salad that has rice in it to really anything. So if you can imagine that basic technique, or how do you make a basic soup? Well, you start with some herbs and, you kind of, you want to pan fry and get the flavors, some onions, some garlic, some carrots, some basic vegetables, and then how do you build from there? So those basic techniques are how I run my kitchen, and it always includes what I have.
Cooking with what you have from a given season.
Yeah.
I was going to share too. I've participated, not this year, but in community-supported agriculture. CSA is the acronym that's used for that. And what that is you essentially pay a farmer before the season begins to support what he's growing, and then you weekly or bi-weekly get a box of produce from their farm directly from the farmer. So it's, there's no middleman and they're not losing any money in between. But I've found that a lot of CSAs, in addition to offering food, are also offering recipes that go with that food.
Oh, that's
which is really great. So you get, if you get a big box of, a bunch of things that I don't really know what to do with, they'll probably provide you with a recipe to try out that would use those items that were included in the
I know you're growing all the time in Wauwatosa at your residence.
Yeah.
I mean, what are some of the favorite things that you and your family share from your efforts?
Beans.
Beans.
Lots of beans. But a lot of things that are easy to grow, that maintain themselves, that are more suited to this climate, to this area, the growing seasons, all of those types of things. So everything that's been mentioned here, tomatoes and onions and peppers of various types. Some of the things we haven't talked about are some of the in-ground that are perennial, like rhubarb and asparagus and some of those types of
I love rhubarb
things.
pie.
And that takes a little more time to cultivate and to maintain, but once the bed is there, it's there.
Yeah.
And it's very, very low maintenance to keep it going, and provides you produce for years and years and years. I am in a Tosa house that has a very small backyard, and we completely converted it over to raised beds. And we also use wall gardens, and if you've heard of a gutter garden.
Yes.
Yeah, we use gutter gardens for various types
You really
of things.
maximize what you have.
Oh, absolutely. You have to when you don't have a lot of space. Doesn't mean you can't grow a lot of food. You can. You just have to be clever about it. That's all. Be very efficient. And so I'm also a member of a CSA, by the way. And the exciting thing that I think about is that I never know what I'm going to get next. And so you're right. You have to be inventive about what you get and what is presented to you. You may have a bumper crop of zucchini, okay?
Well,
Zucchini wars. Do you know about zucchini
War, yes.
It's something we did in rural Illinois, where we had loads and loads of extra zucchini, and we filled them up in a bag, and then we'd go drop them at the neighbor's doorstep and ding dong, and then run.
it's a gift.
Because you don't know what to do with the zucchini.
Absolutely. I think we have a question way in the back. Yes. Yes, sir.
How do you keep little pests or neighborhood critters out of your garden?
That is a great question. in terms of fencing or whatever it takes.
You could hire a coyote.
That'll do it.
But that is the problem. I mean, how do we deal with that? Yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, the cool thing about like using a raised bed is that it's fairly simple to enclose with chicken wire, something as simple as chicken wire, but remembering that you still need to get inside. Yeah. So continuing to leave a place to access the garden. But, you know, in more rural places, you know, places that have larger lots, like out here, it probably is a matter of fencing the entire thing. Otherwise, you're going to have, you know, problems no matter what you do.
What I've done, you're dealing with this, right?
What I've done with, we have lots of raccoons and other creatures that love our garden as much as we do. But I have actually taken to caging in my raised beds. Hardware cloth on the sides, hardware cloth on the top, wow. And all can be taken apart for tending and all that kind of thing. It does have a side benefit too. It's hail-proof.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yeah, so if you take the sides off and you want to keep it open for cultivating, you still keep the top on. And it protects you from...
You got to have a little Miller Park right there in the one with Tulsa.
You got it. We got a roof on it, so...
I like that. How'd you come up with that?
Just out of necessity. You look at it and say, okay, what's going to keep the rabbits out? And then you go with that. And you find something that's inexpensive.
Yeah.
Chicken wire is an excellent solution. Sometimes the rabbits are small enough they get through there. But you find ways to do that.
Right.
So you become inventive.
Mm-hmm. And we have a question right here in the front row. Yes, sir.
Yes, coming from education, I know that the genesis of change comes from kids. And if you want to get something started, have kids who can bug their parents about how something should be done. And I'm wondering if there is a potential that possibly you need to look at as the possibility of cross-curricular involvement with all kinds. This box garden is cross-curricular. You can have the art department put some nice things that will keep the birds away, the little spinny things. You can have the Phy-Ed department create some exercising of tilling the dirt and the soil, and of course the science, and then the transportation industry. It goes cross-curricular. And I'm just wondering if there's any movement in looking at getting some education tie-ins, because this is truly the future of education, is this little box that's right here.
Sure. Yeah.
Amen to that.
Well, from my standpoint, we have a unique situation here at Concordia, is that most of the time that we would actually be doing gardening, we don't have any students here, so that becomes a problem. But we've tackled that and are going to be tackling that more with doing summer camps for gardening, tying that in. You talk about the cross-curricular. Yeah, we're talking about thematic units where you would cover all these different curricular pieces with the garden. You'd spin everything off of that, and it's all integrated, and it makes sense, and the kids can relate to it. And so that's one of the camps that we're starting up, not this year, but the following year. We're gearing up for it by putting our raised beds in place now.
Excellent.
So we cover both sides of it during the school year and during the summers.
Someone have something they want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to. As an educator myself, I think, you know, seeing how comparing learning that goes on in a classroom, which can be beautiful, and life, you know, transformational, to how easily it's life transformational outside, and how much deeper the learning goes when you're getting dirty and you're doing something instead of, as Gretchen said, talking about it. So the difference between doing and talking, get it and kids love doing the work. They love it. I mean, they get supercharged by it. And I see it every time a school group comes. I mean, like if they planted something, the moment they get there, they want to go check on what they planted. And if something is affecting that, they want to figure out what is affecting that. There's a science project right there. So I think you hit it right on, is that this is, you know, a piece of the puzzle of the future, is teaching the next generation, you know, to empowering them to be able to grow their own food, and then having them pass that on and come up with even more beautiful things than we've.
You know, the wonderful thing about that, when a young person connects with nature, he or she really begins to appreciate the meaning of stewardship.
Right.
And being protective and nurturing. But it's from that hands-on experience and seeing the results of, I planted that a while back and now it's starting to emerge. And it really does work. And you begin to sense, I guess, ownership, a sense of ownership in the land probably isn't a good description as much as just that appreciation for the meaning of stewardship.
Yeah, maybe ownership of their own responsibility.
We're responsible for it.
Yeah,
we're responsible for it. Allison, you have a question.
I do. It's about soil and fertilizer. What are some of the best items to use to fertilize the soil that we have readily available at home? For example, I hear about coffee grounds. I hear about using ashes from the grill or the fire pit to protect against slugs. Is there any truth to any of that? Is there other things that we could be adding into our garden that we have available other than going and using Miracle-Gro, which perhaps is the best thing to use also, but I don't know. Can you answer that?
Yes. Yeah. I don't endorse Miracle-Gro, but there are so many things that, that are resources that I think as a society we've kind of placed off to the side. Coffee grounds is a good place to start, especially if people are willing to set them aside for you, and lots of cafes are willing to do that. But a place that I've always enjoyed, gathering is bags of leaves, right? People just set bags of leaves out, or they'll rake them to the side of the road, and they kind of do the work for you, so you can collect it. And in the fall, I always collect bags and bags of leaves, and I have them in my backyard, and because that's a wonderful source of organic matter that is truly organic. It's coming from trees. So that's a wonderful place to start. Wood chips are really, I'm kind of learning to fall in love with wood chips too, because it's free and they also break down very quickly too. And it's a great source to balance, both leaves and wood chips are a great source to balance all of the high nitrogen stuff like coffee grounds and vegetable scraps and fruit scraps, because you need a balance if you're going to create a compost in your backyard.
And I don't want to leave that topic until maybe there's an understanding of what an important issue it is. So even just imagining simply trees lose their leaves, and what would happen if we didn't remove them is they would go back to the soil. And we live in a world where that's not happening. So we're losing our organic matter, we're losing our topsoil at astronomical rates. And one poignant thing that occurred this year to sort of show an example of that is, as we were sourcing our compost for the raised beds this year, we were trying to find the right mix and the right price point. And to get topsoil is so hard now, it's more expensive than compost, because there is a shortage of topsoil in this state because we have so permanently either contaminated it or flushed it down the river. So rebuilding our topsoil is one of the things that is an immediate and emergent issue that we need to talk about. Save the leaves, save the wood chips, save your manure, put it back in the ground. Don't let it go to a landfill or somewhere else. It's so valuable.
And what is it about coffee grounds that initiate the growth? What's in there that
I think
does the job?
The size of the particles. I mean, because just in soil as well, but with coffee grounds, it's so many small pieces. So if we were to spread out that surface area, you're creating a huge surface area for bacteria to grow on, and then by doing that, you're unlocking all the other nutrients that are. And it's already broke down, so it really takes effect rather quickly. It heats up your compost pile. And compost piles do burn. I mean, it's an amazing process. Yes. It's an amazing process. We have another question. Yes, Pam.
I guess I need to state it first and then ask the question. Years ago, if I think about my grandmother had a garden probably 3 times that size. And they didn't have produce shipped in. So do you have a program that teaches people on how to preserve the produce that they're growing to use throughout the year?
Yeah, we often do preservation classes within our other series of classes. We also will often partner with other organizations that offer those classes as part of our series of courses. But I agree with you, it's an important thing. Or even just the simple act of freezing much of the food that comes from the garden. One of my favorite tips to give is to grow a heck ton of basil, lots of it. You know, think of it like a green almost. I mean, put that in every meal. And you harvest it at the end of the season when you can't possibly eat any more anyway, and just blend it up with oil or without, or with garlic and oil or without, and put it in some ice cube trays and put that in a Ziploc bag, and all year long you can have as much pesto, basil as you want. But I think those simple little tips can really go a long way for people understanding. And I think we all have them, actually. I've learned so much from other people that when I learned from someone else, if we shared those tips regularly in a classroom setting or amongst ourselves and each other, we'd get a long way.
How big of a time commitment are we talking about on a daily basis once the season kicks in to maintain and to weed on a regular basis the raised beds here to make sure that, you know, the weeds aren't choking out what we planted? How much nurturing actually takes place?
I think the more you do, the better it looks, right? And the more you learn.
But it's a daily commitment.
It can be, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spend time in my garden every day. It doesn't have to be a daily thing, though. I mean, it could be 2 times a week. But I say that with caution because I think the more time you spend in it, the better you get at it, just like anything, and the more you're going to learn from your garden. So, and the better it'll look.
But can you be too active in the weeding process? Can you actually break down some of the plants? I mean, how cautious?
Not if you're
do you have to
weeding,
be?
no. If you're removing things that you don't want to grow in there. That's,
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
good.
okay. We have another question. Yes.
As you've probably heard, or I hear on the news that pollinators are in a lot of trouble, or honeybees as well as other types of pollinators. What kind of plants do you recommend to help pollinators?
I always think of natives, natives, natives. What can you do to promote all pollinators, not just honeybees? I love honey, and obviously I want to support the honeybees, but I think the conversation about all pollinators gets lost when we think only of the honeybees. So anything that's a native, you want things to flower at all times, starting from early spring to late into fall. You want a wide array of colors and just a wide array of different shapes and sizes of flowers so that every pollinator out there comes to your garden and entertains you for the entire season. It's really beautiful, actually, the array of pollinators that we don't really even know are there.
Interesting. Dan, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's something that I'm really fired up about too. I love native plants. Where I don't have food growing, I have native plants in my yard, and I think that it's, as I said before, it's a shift in the way that we need to think. As we were discussing, to shift from having a monocrop of just a grass that we cut once a week in our yards to something that changes with the seasons and is actually native, that would support an invertebrate population that we rarely think about, but that we actually need in our food system, as well as the entire food circle, food chain of the world and our state and our city needs. So it's a shift in the way we think. And it's a shift in what our neighbors are going to think too. But that's a way to engage your community once again. People are going to ask you, why do you not have grass growing here and these beautiful flowers? And then you get to tell them. And then, hopefully that sets off a chain of events that would make them do the same thing, just like growing food. Because it's a systemic issue. It's not. It's partly the food, but it's everything else because we rely on the pollinators to produce the food, and it's all interconnected.
You've dedicated your careers now to this movement, and Professor, you've dedicated your academic discipline to this movement. Why is it so important?
It's fundamental. We all eat, and the more we understand the whole food cycle, like any other cycle, the better off we're all going to be. It's more efficient. It's less costly. All around, for a number of different facets, it's critical. That's one of our basic functions.
And Gretchen, you have embraced this. This is your part of your daily life. This is what you do. Why are you so passionate about this subject?
Well, it's partly that it's always just been in me from an upbringing, so it was my essence, so to speak. But I also got to a point where I became very fearful for the future. So I've had epiphanal crisis, perhaps, at some point in my life. And then I think it moved to a place of joy and pleasure and deliciousness and richness. You know, I've gone through phases of why this is important work, and I have children. I care for that reason. And I care for the future for humanity, but I also care for the future of biodiversity, of life itself. So it has gone through many phases for me of what is the most important reason to do this.
We're not masters of this environment. We're part of it.
We're part of it.
We're part of it. Are we getting it though, Dan? I mean, you're out educating every day, educating the community about this. Are we beginning to understand?
I think we're moving in the right direction. I hope we are. I think it depends on the youth, right, and how we engage.
To carry the ball. Carry the ball.
Right?
Folks, thank you so much, Dan. You've been marvelous. Gretchen, Professor, thank you for being such a wonderful host. This is a wonderful part of the Concordia academic outreach to the world, really, to the world.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. How about a round of applause for our wonderful guests? It's been a wonderful topic. We've really enjoyed sharing our dialogue with you, and I hope you continue to enjoy our Next Avenue Community Conversation series. Thank you so much for being part of it. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.